This week, I decided to take a look at the topic of affirmative action and then look at how it relates to higher education. So, affirmative action, as it is defined, is a concerted effort to make improvements and create opportunities for those minority groups who have been discriminated against. Affirmative action in the past has usually been mentioned in conjunction with the advancement of minorities when it comes to employment and or education. And it should be noted that affirmative action groups, they're not just defined by race, but also they can be defined by disability, by gender, and by age. So, affirmative action really was initiated with President Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency and then carried out with John F. Kennedy's presidency and in conjunction with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. While affirmative action policies were sought to benefit the African American racial group, it was kind of expanded to include other minority groups such as Hispanics and Native Americans. It also was expanded to benefit women, and then also it was carried over to high learning institutions such as colleges and universities. Universities saw it fit to adapt and or create affirmative action policies as a means to diversify their campuses. This was also great in relation to the media because it was great for publicity to kind of market your university as being equal opportunity or very much racially diverse. So the topic of affirmative action really has two distinct sides. You have those that are going to be for affirmative action and those that are going to be against. And of course, you're going to have plenty of subgroups, those who believe that affirmative action does good as well as some harm. But I'm going to really focus on today those that are for and against affirmative action. Now, I do want to mention that I'm trying to do some research. I came upon some opinions of both sides that it's really hard to say that they have basis and or the facts to kind of justify the statements, but I just found them very interesting on both sides. You have those that are for affirmative action that believe that these policies are just justice being served as their ancestors had to endure discrimination. They believe that they have been discriminated against because of their race, and that's something that they can't control. So they believe that these policies that consider their race to be fair and just and is affording to them opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have. And then you have those that are against affirmative action that believe that they shouldn't have to pay for the discriminatory actions of their ancestors. They also share the argument that they can't control what race they are born and that they are part of the majority group, which I mean, that's a valid point. You have both sides that are saying, hey, look, I can't control my race, and thus the position in which it places me in society. You also have those against affirmative action that say that they weren't born in high class or middle class and that they had to struggle and overcome, and that by instating affirmative action policies, we are basically creating excuses for minorities. So those are just some of the arguments that I've read, some I've even heard personally on both sides. Now, I do want to focus on some arguments that kind of have some basis, some facts that support them. Those that are for affirmative action believe that it creates equal opportunities for those minority groups that otherwise would not have these educational opportunities or have access to these educational resources. Those opposing affirmative action believe that these policies in return create this selective racism. So you're creating an advantage for these minority groups, and thus making the majority group a minority in sense. So very interesting, because the whole basis of affirmative action appears to be that you're creating opportunities for these minority groups. So I can see how both sides have a point when it comes to this argument. Now, a second point is that affirmative action is no longer necessary. And the belief is that it's no longer necessary because these restrictions that used to prevent minorities from entering higher institutions of learning no longer exist. It's been proven by research that there's been an increase in enrollment in colleges and universities by all minority groups, and that actually Caucasian students are receiving less financial aid, um, and thus affirmative action is hurting them. Um, and Caucasian students, they have about a 20% chance now of receiving Pell Grant funding, compared to 38% of minority students that could receive it today. Now, the argument continues with those against affirmative action saying that um, Caucasians are the majority group, should now be allowed to receive such funding because they are the new minority. Now, those for affirmative action argue that it is still necessary, because without affirmative action, the percentage of minorities that exist within selective schools drop below 2%, thus reducing the overall percentage of minorities in higher institutions of learning. Um, and their statistics say that college aged white students still make up 42% of the population, while Black and Hispanic minority groups only make up 34%. Um, Now, it was also said that minority students do have a higher chance of receiving grade based funding, but it is because it is often based off of income. And Caucasian students, they only 48% of them fall into a group that have family incomes under $50,000, which is usually the base point in which these grants are given. Whereas you have 77% of African American students that fall into this group, and then minorities as a whole that make up 71% of this group there.